he starts by setting up an equation. And he says that, first, think about this. Our default state is happiness. Think about it like this. Think about you get a new phone and it's in its factory settings. It works perfectly fine. Everything works well. You're good to go. And then after a few days, you start downloading all these weird apps and all these other programs and all this different crap. And then it's all of a sudden your battery only lasts like 6 hours before you got to charge it again. So he says, we're kind of like this. Our default mode is set to happy, but then we accumulate all of this different junk and programming along the way that ultimately undermines our happiness. And so he says, think about a baby. Okay, a little baby or little kid even, if they're not hungry, they're not thirsty, they're not hot, they're not cold, they're not scared, they're not alone, right? They have no reason to be unhappy, then the baby's going to be happy. And so it goes with us, our natural setting. As long as we do not have a reason to be unhappy, we're going to be happy. And what we'll find as we progress through this book is oftentimes these reasons are all just made up stories in our head where we're comparing ourselves to certain things, or reality is not in line with our expectations, or we're caught up in some story or some narrative or some negative loop. And so we'll talk about how to deal with those. So that's a big idea, okay? Our default mode is happy. So how do we get back there? We explore that, and then we also talk about another foundational idea. So we say, okay, I want to be happy, or I want to be happier. He says there's a really simple protocol that you can use to start to investigate what happiness means to you. Because it's true that there are certain things that are universal parts of happiness, like quality relationships, like exercise and physical health. But there are also certain things, if you love painting, I don't like painting that much. For me, it might make me feel neutral or kind of just bored, but for you, it might make you super happy. So he says literally, and you can pause the video and do this or do it after the video, is literally just create a happy list. I feel happy when blank. And just try to write that down. Go through it quickly. I feel happy when I have a cup of coffee, when I see my friends, when I go on a run, when I walk outside. Whatever your thing is, just keep this list handy, and what you'll find is it does two things. Number one is it'll just make you feel better in the moment because you're bringing your attention to things that generate positive emotion for you. But number two, it can be a useful reference book to have when you're trying to think about small activities or practices you can engage in to bolster your own happiness. So carrying on here as we set up the foundation and kind of the basic ideas, the next one is that happiness is an equation. And essentially happiness is greater than or equal to your events minus your expectations. In other words, when your events, the actual experiences of your life, exceed your expectations, you say, oh, I'm happy about this. When your expectations are higher and the events and circumstances in your life don't match up to your expectations, you're not happy. It sounds incredibly simple, but isn't this so true if you really think about it? It's like when your first job out of college, maybe you're making like $30 an hour and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is so good. But then you have someone who's, the vice president of the company making $150,000, $200,000 a year. And they're like, wow, this isn't that good. My neighbor down the road makes $250,000. So our expectations just shift so much depending on our age, where we're at in life, our friends, the people around us, our circumstances. And so keep this in mind. Yes, it's totally valid to want to have richer experiences or more incredible events in your life, but also an important part of this is managing your own expectations. Finally, we have to choose not to suffer. So now Mo in this book is not ignorant. He says pain in life is inevitable. It's going to happen. It's resisting it, wallowing in it, or kind of focusing on it, because we all tend to do this, don't we? We hyper-fixate on what we don't have and what's not going right. That is all optional. So pain is a part of life, but all of this additional suffering, we're kind of buying into our pain or resisting it or being attached to it, like, why is this happening to me? And digging into it and focusing on it, that is additional suffering that brings no benefit. So to the extent possible, what we're setting up here for the foundation for happiness is to make a conscious decision to say, I want to intentionally reduce my own suffering. And the way I'm going to do that is try to explore where it comes from, what leads to it, how it works, overcoming that natural ignorance that we all have in a lot of ways, because most of us haven't spent that much time trying to figure out what leads to suffering and what leads to happiness and engineering our life accordingly. So it's making a conscious choice. Say, I want to live in a way that reduces my suffering and the suffering of others. So that's setting up the foundation in this equation, and all the stuff he talks about is saying our default state is happiness. And so we need to remove a lot of this junk that gets in the way of it. We can inventory our own happiness and look at what sources of happiness we have in our lives and buy into them. Remember that happiness is greater than or equal to events minus expectations. And finally, we have a choice not to suffer. So now Mo then proceeds in the next part of part one to make the case that when we are caught up in thought, we actually kind of experience negative emotion, okay, or suffering. That's when the thoughts are negative. Now, if we're just in our minds daydreaming about neutral thoughts, that's kind of like escape. And then finally, if the thoughts are positive, remember that equation. So I'm thinking about my experiences and the events in my life, and they're better than my expectations. Okay, when we have those positive thoughts, that's happiness. But interestingly, he takes it a step further and says that true joy comes when we transcend thought altogether. And that means going beyond just living in our heads to actually living in our lives and fully experiencing each and every moment of our life. And of course, it's not going to be possible to be fully present all the time. But I thought this was an interesting thought, that when we're still caught up in the realm of thought, even if it's kind of nice, positive thoughts, it's not quite that level beyond. But when we can step back and step away and rise above all this constant stream of thoughts and living in our heads and this and that and planning and remembering, we transcend that way of being, then we feel some real joy. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. But here is his engineering blueprint. He says, to be happy or happier, you must bust 6 grand illusions, fix the 7 blind spots, and hang on to 5 ultimate truths. And that's what we'll continue to explore. Part 2, these are the 6 grand illusions that get in the way of our happiness. The first is thought. So what we mean here, broadly speaking, when we're talking about grand illusions, is these things, we tend to perceive them as real, but they're kind of just not actually kind of real in terms of like concrete, absolute truth. So there's a little voice inside everyone's head that for the most part focuses on the negative, doesn't it? And it never shuts up. We tend to identify with this thinking mind. Okay, so like, oh, that's me, I'm in here, I'm controlling my body, I'm having these thoughts, I can choose what I want to focus on, what I want to eat for dinner. But the key insight is that thoughts are not reality. Okay, the brain is kind of this thinking machine that just spits out thought after thought after thought. And you can learn to actually slow down, calm, and quiet your thoughts with practice. Just start by observing the thoughts so that you are not caught up in them. Use practices like meditation where you can actually shift your attention to other things. Right? Because what happens is you can direct your attention almost like a beam of light. I mean, even do this right now. Don't think about actually, but direct your attention into your left foot. Go ahead, do it. Now, again, you don't have to think to yourself, left foot, left foot, left foot. You just kind of know where your left foot is, right? And same thing, you can bring your attention into the sounds of my voice. You can bring your attention into smell, wherever you are right now. Do you smell anything? Right? Does it probably not something bad, but anything? You can bring your attention into maybe your breathing. Can you feel your chest rise and fall? So you can direct your attention. And one way to channel your attention out of the constant thought stream in our heads is guide your attention and just sort of place it into something else. So it could be your breathing, it could be your body, it could be yoga, it could be a mantra where you just say a phrase over and over again, like happiness, happiness, or calm, 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 calm. And as you do that, you're learning to direct your attention so that you're better able to kind of step back and have a little bit of separation from your thoughts. Because again, your thoughts are not reality. Your thoughts are thoughts about reality, but they are not it. And additionally, as you do that, you can learn to dispute your own thinking, where you can notice unhelpful thought patterns. And you might say, oh, well, I'm just exaggerating. Or, your friend, you email your coworker and they don't email you back. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, they suck. They're never here on time. They don't check their email. They probably just don't like me. And then what happens? They email you like 2 days later and like, hey, sorry, your email's in spam. And you're like, okay, well, now I feel like an idiot. But again, that's what your thoughts are not reality. And so that is the first illusion we have to bust. The next one, self. Who am I? Who am I? Who are you? Well, this is a very important question. And we already said you are not your thoughts, but you're not your body either. I mean, really think about it. Are you still you? So when you were 10 years old, your body was probably totally different, wasn't it? Well, was that you, or is now you, or which one was you? So we can't really identify with the body. You're also not your personality, right? Your personality is something that you kind of carry around with you, but we all feel a little different. Some days more extroverted, some days more introverted, some days more funny, some days not as funny. And we know that personality changes over time. Well, you're your name then, right? I'm Jackson. Well, what is Jackson? Jackson. It's just a bunch of squiggly symbols on a piece of paper or typed out on a screen. Okay, well, so I'm not my name either. Then what else could I be? So all of these things that are just concepts or things that change over time are not it, not yourself. The only permanent seed of the self is the one that's actually behind these things, who has been the kind of experiencer or the witness, the one who actually sees, the one who sees both the external but also sees your inner world, right? Sees the thoughts. So this is kind of consciousness itself that inhabits your body, inhabits your personality, inhabits all your various roles. This is what we think of as your true self, just your awareness. Because this pure awareness, right? Just the literal moment-to-moment experience of sensory information, that part has not changed since you were literally your earliest memory, right? Your personality around it changed, your body around it changed, your conceptual knowledge and thoughts even changed, but just this kind of seed of awareness, that is the permanent self. And so part of what this is about is learning to identify with your awareness itself. So not the thoughts and emotions that are constantly coming and going, not your personality, not your body, not these roles and concepts and ideas you have about yourself, but the actual experience of the self. Sounds a little far out, but if you start to practice some of this and think about it and meditate a little, you'll see what we mean. Okay, knowledge. Another illusion to bust is we don't actually really know much of anything. All knowledge is tentative. When you know, quote unquote, know for sure that you're right, usually you are in trouble. I mean, for thousands of years, we thought Earth was the center of the universe. And it's like, you lose your job, which you think is probably a bad thing. Okay, this sucks. And you're like, oh man, I just lost my job. All right, I'm going to stop on the way home and buy a lottery ticket. Now, statistically, I do not recommend you do that. But okay, we're doing this example. Let's say you did, and you win $1 million. Okay, well, was it a bad thing? You were so sure. Listen, you were so sure like 2 hours ago that it was the worst thing that ever happened to you, that you lost your freaking job. And now it's the best thing that ever happened to you. So what? What do we know? We don't know shit. Quit kidding yourself. We do not know much of anything. So this is not about being like, oh, well, I'm never going to try to do anything, or I'm not going to learn stuff, or, kind of throwing away everything to an extreme. It's just saying that you need to be cautious. You need to keep an open mind. You need to be skeptic. And more importantly, question your own beliefs and assumptions. When you think, oh, I know for sure that this is who I am and this is what I want to be, there may be times when you really do know for sure. But are you sure you know for sure? Are you sure of your perceptions? So very important, especially when we think about all the stuff going on in our world today of left and right and politics and I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good, you're evil. Have to understand that so much of our knowledge is tentative, and so you should not grasp too tightly on any set of rigid beliefs. Hey, time. This one is going to be a little bit of a doozy to explain. I won't go too in depth. In fact, if you're kind of wanting to know more of it, I suggest you look into the theory of relativity or some other insights from physics. But the short version of this is that time moves differently depending on where you are in the universe. I can't write out the equations for you on that, but trust Albert Einstein. Don't take my word for it. And in fact, it's kind of like, even on planet Earth, if you had like a little watch on a very, 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 very precise stopwatch on the top of Mount Everest versus at the bottom of the ocean, like they would eventually, after some time, they would fall out of sync by, 0.0000 like 1 second or whatever. But this is true. Scientists have discovered this. And I mean, you can think about it a little bit more intuitively. Think of like 5 minutes watching your favorite movie versus 5 minutes of doing sprints or taking a cold shower. Time can almost expand or contract. And they've even taken this farther where they look at if astronauts were to travel at nearly the speed of light. Okay, they would fly out into space. And when you're at a high speed like that, time actually, it kind of slows down. And so they might be gone for them what felt like 10 years, but they would come back to planet Earth and people would have aged 100 years. And so what we think about is space-time. It's like this four-dimensional matrix of space and time is how Einstein described it. And so time, again, is really just a concept. But the important part to take away from this is the only part that's really true is right now. Right now is the only reality. In fact, as I record this video, it's right now. And as you watch this video, it's right now. Isn't that something? Now is the only reality. If you're in the future or you're in the past, then you're living life. You're not living mind. Okay? So don't get too attached to the illusion of time. Control. Importantly, this doesn't mean you just throw your hands up and say, F it, I quit. But we must acknowledge that most of life is out of our control. And so this is just learning to control the controllables and letting the rest just flow. Riding the waves of your life, accepting that your circumstances, certainly you want to influence them positively, but a lot of it will be outside of your hands. And so wisdom and learning to be okay with that. Finally, the illusion of fear. Fear dominates so much of our lives, especially when we are not aware of it. So first, acknowledge it when you feel fear. Don't run from it. Don't justify it. Don't back it. Just say, oh, I see there's some fear here. And then explore what's at the root of it. What am I really afraid of here? What could go wrong? And what could go right? Is the fear justified? And then consider maybe exposing yourself to it if that's appropriate and building up your tolerance. Because what we tend to find, if you actually you question your fears, like, okay, I have a talk coming up. Oh, I'm worried that during this presentation I'm going to mess up. Well, why is that? Well, I think that I'm just not going to be a very good speaker. Well, what's behind that fear? You say, well, I just guess I don't want people to think less of me or judge me. And it's like, well, what's behind that fear? Oh, it's maybe a fear of seeing myself as inadequate. And well, what's behind that fear? And you might discover going through that process that it's really about your own feeling of inadequacy. And so you can start to explore, well, what would it mean to really accept myself and to love myself unconditionally? And then you might, again, expose yourself to more of that fear. We say, well, is this fear justified? Well, no, even if I mess up a few words in the monthly presentation, no one's going to care after literally 2 minutes. And they're probably all going to feel bad for me and feel better about me. And then you might say, okay, well, I'm going to do this speaking. And then, maybe I'm going to give a toast at my friend's wedding. And I'm going to kind of expose myself to that fear-provoking stimuli so that I build my comfort tolerance to it and learn to overcome. So while caution and skepticism may be helpful, mostly out of life or death situations, fear is just about always unhelpful. So we encourage you to explore your fear, to face your fear until you eventually overcome it. Okay, moving on to part 3. This one we'll go through pretty quickly. This is all about how human beings have these blind spots or these systematic errors in our perception. So we do things and they kind of undermine our happiness because they tend to give us a distorted picture of reality. So we use filters, we make assumptions, we make inaccurate predictions, we distort our memories, we use labels, we feel emotions and then reason behind them, and we exaggerate. So one of the kind of biggest examples of this is what's called the negativity bias. And think about how human beings would have evolved, right? We're walking through the woods or the jungle or the savannah, surrounded by snakes and spiders and lions and whatever other scary animals are out there trying to eat us, tigers. And it's there's danger behind every turn. And so your kind of standard mode of being is you're just walking around scanning, is something going to jump out? Is something going to get me? I need to try to find food, but what if there's something over there? Something startles you and you might run away and you survive. And so the people who were a lot more chill, that they just kind of walk through the jungle woohoo, yeah, hey, it's pretty nice out here. Oh, look at that big furry cat over there. Hey, buddy, come over here. Okay, those people didn't do so well in terms of evolution. We didn't get their genes. And so our default mode is to be looking for danger at every turn, and we're perceiving the negative, what's going wrong and what we don't have, more than what's going right and what we do have. And, on top of this, we tend to make up stories where we exaggerate, we use labels, and we feel emotional, and we oftentimes make inaccurate assumptions and predictions. So think about this. It's 7 o'clock. You're supposed to meet your friend for dinner at 7 o'clock. Okay, they're not there. 7:05, it's not there. How are you feeling? Probably a little bit irritated. 7:20, what about now? Still probably a little bit bothered. 7:30, now you're just feeling hungry, so you say, all right, screw it, I'm going to order. 7:45, it might actually start switching a little bit to fear, to anxiety. Are they okay? And then let's say 8 o'clock, they say, oh my goodness, you're not going to believe this, but I was halfway there and I got totally lost, and then my phone died, and I had to drive around until I found a gas station, and then I had to go into the gas station. I had to wait like 10-15 minutes for my phone to charge on the charger, and then finally, once it got charged on the charger, I called you, and oh my god, it feels so bad. It's like 55 minutes or an hour. And now how do you feel? Well, all of that stuff where you were like, oh, they're such a terrible person, I hate these, like, why would they do this to me? And then all that fear you had about, oh my god, what happened? All of that was fake. It was all made up. It was all in your head. It was all stories and assumptions. And so just like that, the whole thing switches. And so this, again, is an example of how our own perceptions can be so just distorted by our own minds. Okay, so the key idea here, am I sure of my perceptions? Are you sure of your perceptions? We should constantly ask this question and try to seek the truth. Part 4, the ultimate truth. I'm actually going to start here. And importantly, he says, look, all else equal, okay, because there's very few absolute truths. Choose to believe in the truth that makes you happy. The truth is just one point on an infinite spectrum of different concepts, but some truths stand up to the test of reality more than others. And I think there's a really good quote on this by William James, who says, the truth is what works. This isn't about being crazy and delusional, of course, but it's just saying if there are two relatively plausible, useful explanations for something, for different models of the world or different core beliefs, why not choose the one that's going to empower you to be happier? So the first truth is the power of now. Live right now. So one of the most thorough studies of happiness, I encourage you to look it up. I think I have a video on it too. The wandering mind is an unhappy mind. This showed that when our minds wander, we are actually less happy. And the most interesting part of it, even when our minds wandered to like positive things, we were still less happy. And one of the researchers explains that like it's kind of like a lottery ticket where you either lose $10, lose $20, or lose $30. If you daydream about negative stuff, it's like losing 30. If you daydream about neutral, it's like losing 20. And even if you daydream about positive stuff, it's still like losing $10. It's still less happy making than if you were to just be fully engaged in what you were doing. It's always right now. Like I said, even as you listen to this, it's right now. As I record this, it's right now. And if you want to be happy, live in the now. Do this by cultivating awareness. Awareness is this experience of the present moment, the ability to be where your feet are. It's living your life moment to moment instead of living your mind, stuck in the future or stuck in the past. And so how can you cultivate more awareness to bring you into the present moment? Well, you can reduce distractions. Try to limit phone and email and all that stuff that's pulling at your attention, and multitasking. Multitasking is a myth. Don't do it. Use reminders. This could be something like a bracelet or a little mark on your hand, and whenever you see it, you pause and say, okay, I'm going to come back. My business partner, Paul, talks about whenever he washes his hands, he slowly washes every hand, smells the soap, wash, slow water. And then once he wants to stop washing his hands, he's about to run out. He's like, no. Calmly get the paper towel. Notice the sensation of the paper touching my hand. And so I try to do a little mantra before I eat my meals. And then, quite frankly, usually I eat way too fast after that. But it's all about building these formal reminders and rituals into your daily life that help bring you back to the present. And then finally, just become a fanatic. Practice awareness in your daily life. Try to be aware all day, every day, knowing that it's impossible, but you can still try. And the most important thing is that whenever you notice you're not aware, you actually just practiced awareness. So, I mean, imagine that. That's why people, I think, get hung up with like, oh, I can't meditate. Well, actually, you can. If you notice your mind has wandered off and you're not fully present, you just did the thing. You just awareness. So try to bring that into your daily life. Notice when you're not fully aware and come back to the present moment, and you'll practice very well doing that. So whatever you're doing, giving it your full awareness. Change. Everything's changing all the time. Did you know that? And if you fail to embrace this, you're going to suffer. So this is about learning to go with the current of life's flow. Seek balance. And I really love this little rule that Mo shares, which is remember to look down. Okay? And what he means by this is we're constantly looking up to people, looking up to our goals. And so he's not talking about looking down on other people, but he's saying instead of constantly looking up, why don't you look down for a moment? Compare yourself to other people down there and think of the things you do have. So 3 billion people live on less than $3 per day. 1 billion people have no clean water, and 100 people in the US alone are homeless. So embrace change, seek balance in your life, but also remember to stop looking up and stop looking ahead all the time. Stop and look down now and then and recognize what you have. Love. The more love you give, the more you get back. This is the third truth. We are talking about unconditional love here, by the way, not necessarily like romantic or passionate love. We're talking about love that is free of expectation, free of clinging, and free of desire. He says to love is to give all you can. So do your best to cultivate a sense of like loving kindness, of open caring and connection for everything and everyone. And now the truth is that sounds kind of selfless, like you're going to give everything away. But the truth is it's actually selfish in a good way, because it'll make you feel way better. And as the Beatles sang, love is all you need. Now, this takes us to the last two ultimate truths. And I will say that Mo specifically says that these truths are kind of open to interpretation. Like they're not absolute, they're just his perspective, but he wants you to at least think through them. So the truth of death. It says death is certain. Obviously this we know, but it's not always a bad thing. And especially in our culture, we're so averse to death that we don't see the kind of benefit of it. And it does bring benefits. Sometimes it puts you out of your own misery or your suffering if you're like super old or have a chronic health illness. But it also can be an incredible life coach, because when we face death, we immediately come back to what is most important. So we should accept death as inevitable. We should actually learn from death and use it to help us prioritize what matters most in our lives. And so we focus on living right now. And I like this idea too. Remember that everything is a rental. Your possessions, your achievement, even your loved ones. They're not yours. You'll have them for 100 years at best. They're not yours. So don't fixate or cling or worry too much. Right? Treat everything as transient flow of life. And finally, this is Mo's perspective. He makes the case that death is not the end. You know, how can something come out of nothing? And he thinks that while the body and this kind of form or this manifestation of consciousness disappear, life or pure consciousness always is. And so whether or not you agree with that, of course, that's totally up to you. But it may be that having this belief helps you to live a happier and more peaceful life. Finally, the design or designer. So there's really no way to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that something does not exist. Note my emphasis there, that it does not exist. I mean, even think about unicorns. Yeah, sure, very unlikely that unicorns exist, but hey, how could we prove with 100% certainty that they don't exist anywhere in the universe? So the idea here is when we think about like a creator or a god or a higher power, when we look at like the sheer amount of luck and randomness that goes into just having a bunch of particles in space, boom, big bang, and eventually human consciousness, it might be that it's actually more likely that there was a designer. Now again, hear me out if you're skeptical. I'm not saying this is it. I'm just saying how he explains it. So Brian Greene has this famous thought experiment where he says this. So take the novel War and Peace, which is like 1,200 pages. Okay, so imagine you have all these pages printed out, you throw them off a tall building, and they just so happen to land in the perfect order of the entire book, all 1,200 pages. Seems impossible, right? But when you look at the statistical probabilities associated with a human being evolving out of a bunch of random atoms, it's kind of like this. In fact, a scientist, Christian Anfinson, calculated that it would take 10 to the power, so this is exponential, 10 to the power of 26 years for a simple protein that makes up the human body to randomly fold into the proper shape that's needed to sustain life. Well, the problem is, this is more than 1 trillion times longer than the calculated history of the universe. So if you have, again, just these random like molecules and chemicals, and you're saying, well, yeah, maybe it just went through all the possible different shapes and iterations and combinations, and eventually it, got into this complex reaction, and then it eventually became a cell, and then it eventually became a animal, and then a person or whatever. Again, purely statistically talking about it here seems to be an impossibility. And so now maybe, just maybe, there's some design to it. And we're not necessarily talking about an old dude up in the sky with a white beard. If that's what you believe in, that's fine, but that's not necessarily the idea is saying here. It's more like drawing the analogy that there's some principle, some creative force, some designer, and some design that's within the universe. Not that it's controlling every step either, but just that it created some of these laws and rules and inherent patterns that govern everything and kind of created the conditions necessary for life and consciousness to emerge. So his version of the designer is that there is some big picture design, that all the dots do connect, that it's all part of a bigger story, but there's not some designer in here saying, oh, you prayed to do really well on your history test tomorrow. All right, well, yeah, I'll give you a good score on your history test, and then, oh, that kid over there who has cancer, well, we'll just kill him and whatever. No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is there's some design or some grand scheme or some higher power that's created the conditions for this big story of life and consciousness in the universe to manifest. And so I'll leave you with that Mo points out that he believes in evolution and natural sciences, just like I do. The point is that there may be more than meets the eye, and that having some faith in higher power, whatever that means to you, and some design that makes the dots connect, call it God, call it the designer, call it the spirit, call it the universal consciousness, etc., may make you a bit happier at the end of the day. So we can all experience happiness in our own lives. And the way to do that is to overcome these illusions that get in the way of happiness, to be conscious of our blind spots that get in the way of our perception of reality, and try to move closer to a perception that's more in line with the truth. And finally, embrace these 5 truths. Live in the now, love, acknowledge everything is impermanent and everything is constantly changing. And just consider facing and accepting the reality of death and using that to inform how you live your life now. And just, once again, maybe an invitation to have faith in some design and some power and some creative intelligence or force that's greater than all of us. And so if you do all that, not easy, but it is relatively simple, you will be able to engineer your path to joy. So that has been Solved for Happy. Thank you for watching. Here's a video that YouTube suggests you'll like. As always on this channel, I break down the arts and sciences of the study of happiness in what I hope is a very practical and useful way to help you be at your best in your life. So thanks for watching. This has been Jackson Kirchis, and I'll see you next time.